This is the Wednesday, April 8th, 2026 meeting of the Portsmouth Energy Advisory Committee. I'll quickly take the roll. Tracy Cameron.
Here.
Tom Rooney. Here. And Antonio. Present. Peter Somsich. Here. Kevin Charette. Here. MC Hernandez. I believe she's here on Zoom. Betsy Blaisdell is not with us, may join us by Zoom. And Fred Calcineri is here. Member from interlocking member with sustainability. We've got a couple of things to do tonight. I'm excited that we're going to hear back about Jones Avenue and feasibility. So let's listen, absorb, think of some good questions and see if this is something that could make the city better. And then we're also going to talk about the CPC&H issues that are swirling around. This committee is invited to be part of the work session on April 20th before the council meeting, and we'll have Henry Herndon from the coalition and Jackson Kaspari also from the coalition. And we'll have Don Kreese, who is the New Hampshire consumer advocate. That's a position whose job it is to advocate for ratepayers, gas and electric utilities. So I think he'll be the mayor had a good idea to invite Don, and he'll be part of that discussion. So when we get to that portion, think about what you think the salient facts are with the CPC&H relationship, and maybe we'll just go around the table with people's thoughts on continuing that relationship. And then some updates on some legislative things. But let's dive right into Jones Avenue.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for having us. My name is Christine Sproviero. I'm with the Department of Public Works. So we investigated feasibility for Jones Ave solar array for the city council direction. We solicited services from Apex Analytics, and we have Mike and Ian, I'm not sure if he's on yet, joining us. Saw him, so introductions necessary. I don't know if we want to introduce city staff.
Yeah,
everybody, but up to you guys.
Oh, we have Peter Rice, DPW Director, and Peter Burtz, Planning and Sustainability Director. Which is great to join you, Christy.
Yeah, I'm very happy to have their support.
But it's your show.
Yes, yes, it is. So with that being said, I think I'll just note that we will take questions at the end. Pretty short presentation, so it should be about 10 minutes. If we go to the next slide. So Apex estimated solar production cost and system sizing based on a number of data points. And with that, they created three scenarios that would be viable options for the city. The first option would be a city single 1.7 megawatt AC system that would go front of the meter down Incinerator Road to Jones Ave. One thing to note about this, anything over 1 megawatt requires a 9 to 11 month study done by Eversource. So that's where option 2 came in. Apex evaluated and recommended that if we wanted to get an ITC credit for this project, which would be about 30 to 40% IRS refund for this project, we could break it into 2. That would make us avoid that 9 to 11 month study and get us into the window for that credit program, which expires in December of 2027. You do need that system up and running by 2027. So just something to note there. Option two is two systems. One is 950 kilowatts, which would go up front of the meter to Jones Ave. The second one would be 750 kilowatts, and it would go to the high school behind the meter. So we'll look at those paths a little bit and discuss them depth in a couple more slides. And then option three, that modeled option two using a power purchase agreement, and that's assuming a 50%, 15% discount on market rates when it's up and running. Next slide, please. So pros and cons of each option. Pros for the single 1.7 megawatt, it has the lowest total cost to construct when you consider having to run two conduits for the school and front of the meter. The two system would cost more. But it would be a medium net benefit, the single system, only if the two systems qualified for the ITC. Based on our procurement process and how long that takes, it would be very tight to meet that ITC window. So something important to remember there. And obviously we wouldn't have that time pressure for investment tax credit with the single. So, you do design fast, make mistakes. So sometimes it's better to take your time and really evaluate what you're constructing, what you're designing. There would be no behind the meter complications at the high school. Currently, the high school has a system. You would need to either retrofit the existing system or put a new system at the school for this new routing. And this is a big one, minimal, if any, disturbance to woodlands and wetlands, if you're just running it down Incinerator Road. Cons, there's no way you'd make the ITC refund window. There would be a larger new bond issuance by the city because we're not getting that refund. And then, as I mentioned, the longer and more complicated study. Option two, with the two city-owned systems, which total 1.7 megawatts, you're getting the same amount of power. Medium total cost to construct. Smaller system can be connected behind the meter at the high school to lower demand charges from utility. There's a really big value in that. When you connect front of the meter, you're not getting the credit that you get back, say, you're paying 10 cents for 1 unit of energy to Eversource, and you're only getting 7 cents back with that credit. So behind the meter is better because you're using all that energy. Let's see, highest net benefit, as I mentioned, if you qualify for the ITC, both systems should have a shorter, less costly study because they are under 1 megawatt each. That is assumed. It could be different when it gets before Eversource. And we also have the potential, in theory, for phasing the project. So the system that would go to the high school, there's a lot more permitting involved because you're going through wetlands. So that would draw it out. You could just go for the 950 going to Jones Ave, smaller, still under 1 megawatt, so you don't have to do that long-term study. And you also limit your permitting window. So just throwing that out there as an option. Cons, time pressure for ITC, additional new electric line through the woodlands and wetlands. It's my understanding that when you construct a power line, you would need to clear cut about a 30-foot wide corridor to construct that underground utility. With it being underground, you would reduce the maintenance corridor down to a 10-foot wide swath, but it's a lot of linear feet through wetlands and wooded areas. Not to mention there is a lot of ledge there. So construction would take a while just because you're hammering through all of that. It's really, you really can't avoid it in that area. But we'll look at the wetlands in a map in another slide. See, disturbance to high school during construction is something else to consider. If we did it in the summer, I'm sure the sports fields are still being used in the summer, so something to consider there. And it would be higher total cost if we don't. Next slide, please. Option three is, again, option two with power purchase.
Sorry to interrupt. We can't see slides on the Zoom. We just see a file folder for peak on the
Thank-
screen right now.
Thank you for saying that.
Sorry about that.
Sorry, Betsy.
All good.
How's that?
That showing up?
Betsy, are you seeing that?
I can see it. Yep. Options evaluated. That's the slide it's on.
Yes.
Great.
Option
That's
3. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
great. So option 3, pros, low upfront cost to the city, and developer performs all design and construction activities. They would also perform the operation and maintenance on it once it is constructed. Cons, lower city benefit. You're assuming a 15% savings for power rate. A private entity is operating on city property. There's a risk of not realizing power saving rates because you're assuming 15%, but it does change over time.
Christine, would you
Yeah.
mind going back over the first 2 options for people on Zoom?
Yeah.
And the
Sure.
people who will see this?
Of course. Yeah, okay. So option 1, single 1.7 megawatt, owned by the city. So that's one system that goes directly to Jones Ave through the existing access road. Pros and cons for that: lowest total cost to construct because you're only doing one conduit line. Medium net benefit only if the 2 system qualifies for those credits. There's no time pressure in this situation for investment tax credit, as I mentioned earlier. If you have, more time to review your design and construction, less mistakes. You would also avoid doing behind the meter at the high school. Again, if you already have an existing solar system there, so you would either have to retrofit that or you would put a new system in for it to connect into the high school. And 1.7, again, minimal, if any, disturbance to woodlands and wetlands. Cons, definitely no ITC refund to the city, larger new bond issuance without that credit, and a longer, more complicated study, 9 to 11 months by Eversource. 2 city-owned systems. Pros, medium total cost to construct. Smaller system can be constructed behind the meter at the high school to lower demand charges from utility. Again, after reviewing all this information, behind the meter really does seem like the best value in any scenario. You would get, both systems would have shorter, less costly studies by Eversource, so that gives you more opportunity to make that ITC window. Potential for project phasing and financing, you could just do the 950 to Jones Ave, which would allow you to avoid wetland permitting, which would take a significant amount of time. Cons, again, time pressure, adding a new electric line through the woodlands and wetlands to the high school. A lot of wetland impact there, 30-foot wide construction corridor, reduce it down to 10 feet for maintenance, so that's a permanent impact to the wetlands, no matter how you look at it. You want to consider additional development costs, such as ledge removal and time. Ledge removal is very costly. A lot of linear feet that you would need to go through for that. Disturbance to the high school during construction. So I don't know, I assume activities and teams are probably practicing there through summer at any time, so you want to consider that too. And higher total cost overall for construction. Let's see, we can go one more slide, please. So the timelines. So as I mentioned, you can phase the 2 system project and potentially capture that 35 to 40% eligible costs. I should mention site development cost is generally not included for the credits. It is for the pure construction of the solar array. And again, the project would need to be online by 2027 to qualify for the ITC. We as a city did an internal evaluation just with our experience with DES timeframes. And it indicated that we're unlikely to meet that schedule identified before the 2-year system option. Option one, timeline considerations. Option one is at the bottom. You can see that ASO cluster study process, that's a 9 to 11 month study that you would need to do. Otherwise, everything else is pretty much the same. We did pop in environmental permitting. This timeline was created by Apex. Well, all the technical information is created by Apex. We're just presenting it, but we extended the hire and EPC design to fit our procurement timeline with 2 months for design work. And environmental permitting, we believe that it would take a considerable amount of time, not only for the wetland permitting, but you would also need to re-permit the landfill cap as well. That requires engineering studies for stability, design for wind. You'd also have to consider sheet flow for rainwater, but there's another slide that we can go through for that as well. Scenario two, it would be very tight to meet that timeline for the ITC credit. That blue line right there is the cutoff for the ITC in December of 27. Let's see, but either system, there's still significant long-term benefits for either. Next one, please. Okay, so these are the two pathways. So option one, just with the one system down Incinerator Road, ties into the front of the meter. Option two, one down Incinerator Road, one towards the high school. Time. See, so this is a GIS view, so you can see how it goes through the wooded area. And if you click one more time, it really highlights the wetlands that you would need to go through. And also something worth mentioning are the prime wetlands to the south of the landfill. You need to be very careful not to operate within that buffer that would require significant additional permitting. Let's see, we can, next slide, please. So landfill closure considerations. So land cap stability evaluation. Currently, our permit requires us to do stormwater and gas control. So we monitor every year for groundwater and gas monitoring, and we report that. It's been very stable with all the data. And we will be renewing our permit in 2027. It renews every 4 to 5 years, I think. But this would, I think, Peter, you mentioned having to go through this process to reclassify it. Would probably take some time.
I think that would take some time. Yep, for sure.
And then you have to consider operation, access, and maintenance. You'll probably have to redo the road. And there's probably a few other things that you would need to alter on the landfill to get it up and ready for solar capacity. Next slide, please.
It's stable now, right?
It is stable, yes. You wanna, it's for the added weight.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a stability consideration. Sorry, I didn't wanna make anyone panic. So just a few financial definitions for the next slide, for anybody who's not technically savvy in the solar industry like me. So you'll see nominal total savings and cash gross. So this is all project cash inflows modeled with a 25-year time frame. So you know, if you just had a solar array poof on the landfill, that is the figure that you would see. Nominal total net savings is nominal total savings in cash minus construction costs. Net benefit is nominal total net savings in today's money. So $1 today is 75 cents in 5 years. Next slide, please. So Apex evaluated all the different values for all the different options. So with the ITC option two system has the largest net benefit. You would break even at 16 years. Without ITC, option one, single system, has the largest net benefit. You would break even at 20 years. If the ITC refund isn't received for obviously option two, that break even point is extended by 3 to 4 years. The private option has the lowest benefits overall. You're assuming that 15% savings on electrical costs. It may not be realized currently. There's a solar array that the city has through PPA that is currently 30% over market rate for power. So something to consider there. And you can see the figures. Obviously, private owned is the least beneficial at 1.2 million. Two system with tax equity refund is 5 million. Single system without ITC is 4 million. Next slide, please. So summary. I think I went through most of this, so I won't go through it again. But after reviewing all this information, we believe as a city that it would be good to explore alternative behind the meter options throughout the city, possibly at the DPW there. Look into adding more solar at the high school, potentially adding more solar to Madbury. Next slide, please. So Apex provided a lot of details that gives you a background of their analysis. I'm not going to go through these, but we'll just take a look really quickly at them. Next slide, please. So this just describes their focus on how they analyzed everything and how they determined their CapEx estimates. Next slide, please. This also, it's more details on that. I'd say because this is so detailed, questions for this, we can read until the end to open it up to Apex. But the most important slide that I do want to touch on that they provided in this appendix is, I think it's the next one. Yes, so this breaks down the cost of each system. So system 1 and 2 combined, just as construction costs, is greater, as we mentioned, by 557,000, with the combined being roughly 4 million. So something to consider there. And again, pre-development costs would not be eligible for that ITC credit. And I think that really covers it. Next slide. Yeah, I think we can open it up for questions. Hopefully I didn't make it too confusing.
A lot of good data.
Yeah,
Thorough.
Apex did a very good job. Yeah, appreciate that.
Question, did you say why you couldn't do 1.7 megawatt option behind the meter through the high school?
It would just be too much, and it wouldn't make sense. It would, well, actually, I'll let Mike answer that.
Yeah, I think part of the reason too is that there was already solar on the high school, and so we were trying to stay under certain limits. And then I think, as Christine had previously mentioned, you get most of the value if you're able to fully use the energy behind the meter, and less value if you start exporting. And so that was one of the considerations we looked at as well. The other thing, again, I think as Christine framed very nicely at the beginning, is we looked at the site itself and how much solar it could support. And that's what gave us that overall number of how many megawatts could sit on the landfill. And then we figured out, or we started looking at, is it one project? Is it two projects? Could it go to the high school? Do you just export all of it? And then you can see all of that in the financial analysis.
Go ahead, Steve.
So Michael, can you just rephrase that? So are you saying that the 1.7 megawatts additional power we would not be able to use behind the meter, including the one that's on the high school right now?
That was our impression of the high school load, and I believe the high school has 2 meters, and so it was not clear to us. And our initial analysis or thought was that would be too much for just the high school, and it wouldn't be able to use all of that electricity. And so that would not, again, then you would not be using it behind the meter, so you wouldn't realize as much value.
Just one point of clarification on that, because we have a massive indoor pool that's heated next to the high school. I don't know if that is connected to those 2 meters, but that seems like a massive demand there.
Is it electrically heated or is it gas heat? Well, anyway, fair point. And if that was a load and behind that meter, then that would be something to consider.
Unfortunately, I can't answer. I don't know, Peter, if you know if it's electric or gas, but if it's electric, I can't imagine a 1.7 megawatt system being big enough to like be a net exporter.
And then just the other consideration there is just the timing and that system being of a size where it would probably have to go through an affected system operator study. And I think what you saw in Christine's timeline, if there was kind of a race to try to qualify for any of those ITC, any of the credits, that would then impact that timeline as well.
Is it even feasible to permit and construct in that window to capture the ITCs? I mean, there's a whole bunch of caveats were thrown out, and every time it just seems like it's not even a realistic assumption to be modeling.
I don't think so.
Yeah,
No.
It's tight.
unfortunately, kind of just where we are at this point.
Yeah.
It'll be
Mhm.
great. It just doesn't seem in the cards.
Right. Not only the permanent,
Unfortunately.
but, which capital improvement plan do we look at?
Yeah.
Where does that target us?
So it would have to go through Eversource interconnection review, and then hopefully in parallel, if you were trying to make that the environmental permitting review as well for the landfill itself. And then there'd be some design considerations as well that would impact, I think, the landfill permitting and how you would essentially be stabilizing or attaching the solar racks to the ground, whether or not you were using like a heavy ballast or if you were using some sort of screw that would then potentially puncture the landfill cap. And so those design considerations would probably impact the amount of time on the environmental permitting as well.
Ben? Oh, Tom.
I know, I didn't have anything. Hey, Mike, how you doing?
Hey, Ben, good to see you again.
Yeah. If we're racing to meet the ITC under option 2, but the environmental permitting perhaps takes longer than the time afforded to get the ITC, what does that number look like without the ITC?
So at that point, I think it was the scenario that Christine, at that point, there probably would not be the value of separating it into the two separate projects. The reasoning for that was to try to expedite the timeline. And so then it would be, I forget, Christine, if it was option 1 or 2, but then you would, I think, just default to the single system option, and then you can see all the financial calculus associated with that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's in the last slide, just the pure cost.
Okay.
From an environmental permitting standpoint, sorry, there's no like raise hand option on Zoom, so I'm just chiming in. You guys can shut me up. On the Conservation Commission, we have DES personnel, Barbara McMillan, and I'm wondering if they have a process by which you can do like any sort of expediting. I don't know, like, is it worth having a conversation with her to see how big of a barrier that is given the timeliness of the install date for the ITC?
I can take that a little. Barbara's retired from DES, but yeah, she did work at DES, but she was in their water quality bureau. You'd have to talk with their hazardous waste bureau people, I think, to do the landfill.
Okay.
Different conversation, but I don't even know what level of permitting they'd want to see for this because we'd have to come up with a design to bring to them first.
Hey, Mike. Hey, Mike, does the pro forma include an inverter that lasts the whole period, or do we have to replace inverters?
We assumed a 20 or 25-year life. Ben, it's a good question. I don't have it in front of me. I can get back to you on that one. But I think the way we were thinking about it holistically. So we tried to include any cost that we think we would incur over the lifetime of the system.
Yep.
So my guess is that if there would needed to be any sort of replacement, that would have already been part of that analysis and then baked into what you saw on the slides this evening.
Okay. And do you know the levelized cost of electricity on these? On the, what spits out of that?
Yeah, let me get back to you on that one, Ben. Fair question. I know we have it somewhere. I just don't have it right at my fingertips.
Thanks, Mike.
Other questions?
Will we be able to have a copy of these so I can
Absolutely.
read all them very carefully and then
Yes.
bug Mike again later?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah, The folder link in the meeting invite didn't work for me. I don't know if it worked for other people, but I'm not sure if this presentation's in there, but I couldn't access it. The summary slide came really quickly in terms of recommendations and next step. Would you guys mind just repeating what you said on that slide on what you think our recommended direction should be, please?
Sure.
Wanna look at it on the slide.
Yeah, let's bring it back up if you don't mind. So yeah, I went through it pretty quickly. Most of the information I had already kind of touched on a few times, so but I can certainly go through it in more detail.
Let's make sure you're actually sharing. Betsy, can you see that?
I can see the CapEx comparison slide.
So keep
Next
going
slide.
back. Back. There we go. So is this the slide you were talking about?
Yep. This is it. Yeah, thank you.
So I'll go through everything. Sorry about that.
You don't need to go through the pros and cons. I captured that since you guys revisited those slides. But is this last line what the actual recommendation is for next steps? That like this is to me this reads as everything's off the table and we should instead look at other behind the meter options and not be on the landfill.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say everything is off the table. But we did learn that behind the meter really is the best value in any situation. So if you look at doing something behind the meter at the DPW site, you don't have to do all that trenching through the woods and through the wetlands. So that's where that kind of recommendation leaning towards exploring other options would be.
But does it have to be either or, right?
No.
I mean, couldn't that,
I think it's a place to start rather than a
So
long term.
for context, though, the current budget in the CIP is based on a power purchase agreement. So it would need to, the recommendation is not to pursue a power purchase agreement. It would be to pay for it cash, which would therefore be an additional capital outlay that the city council would need to consider. So that's just, to put in frame of reference.
Yep. That's helpful. And I think like one of the things we questioned in this was just can 1.7 megawatts be handled behind the meter? And I don't know that we have like a full answer to that. I kind of heard like there are 2 meters. We don't know if the pool is included. So that still feels like an unanswered question right now. I'd be curious to see if we could look at
Betsy,
the demand profile.
I
Yep.
believe it's gas.
It's gas.
But-
Yeah, it's gotta be gas.
It is, yeah.
Yes.
And it is a separate, it's built separately, but it is, I'm just confirming with staff, but Peter, you think it is staff?
I think
Again,
it
I
is.
think it is too, but I would, I don't wanna.
Yeah. No, check. Well,
Okay.
so let me just put this in perspective that we have a landfill. And the landfill is useless except as a landfill right now. So looking at the future, is there something that we can make with this landfill besides just burying our trash? And it's a long-term perspective, obviously, but it seems to me this is, despite all the complications involved, this is a great location for a relatively large array. And it's not being used for anything else except burying our trash. So I wouldn't want to give up on it too easy because this is something we can control.
It's
Sure,
in the old plan.
I would, if I may,
Yeah.
we're not saying don't ever pursue
Yeah.
solar array on that. We're just saying, given all the considerations right now, it's probably not the best use of our dollars. And we wouldn't, we'd have the most benefit by going behind the meter wherever possible. Look at expanding the existing high school, look at expanding Madbury, look at it, adding the new roof at DPW is solar ready. So, that's a relatively easy thing to do and we
Yep.
would use all that power. So I would say pursue those first, prior to, and by the time, that this gets around, there may be a new federal government that is supportive of this again. So you don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those are good points, Peter. And the other question, I'm thinking about a deal I did once with like Dick's Sporting Goods and an airport where they built the solar array at whatever Pittsburgh Airport, and Dick's was close by, and they became the behind the meter option. And that massive condo development that went in right next to the landfill, could that become an option? So we're not saving the city on utility bills per se, but could they be like an off taker? I mean, could we even consider creative options for that? Because they're literally right next to that landfill. The same for the strip mall there. I don't know who owns the strip mall there, but like they're adjacent and you don't have those costs of tunneling through wetlands and forest.
Said differently, is virtual net metering an opportunity here, or does it have to be literally physically net metered and tied to what the high school's load is?
Thank you, Ben. Yeah, virtual net metering, exactly.
So Ben, it was our impression of the Eversource rules that the virtual net metering still didn't pay you the same. I mean, it's still a net metering rate as opposed to a one-to-one, one-for-one offset if it was fully behind the meter. So it
Yep.
still doesn't produce kind of the full value. So it's not that it's not an option. It's just that what we looked at was that some of these other opportunities may be kind of provide more value. And I think that's reflected in some of the pro formas.
Thank you.
What would be the lifetime of something like this? In other words, if we wanted to look at,
The life cycle of it?
yeah,
They use 25 years, Peter, but that may be different from the physical life.
Yeah, they use 25 years for their model, but they said it can last over 30 years. You do have to do some maintenance and replacements, but that was
And
their.
And there are ongoing operating and maintenance costs baked into the financial models to kind of represent what you just described.
so what I'm hearing is it's most financially beneficial if the city owns it as opposed to a deal with a private developer.
Yes.
And so that to me says, well, what lifetime are we looking at the total value? In other words, at some point we pay off the bond, whether it's 10 years or 20 years, and then it's all just cash flow. So if it lasts 30 years, what's the ultimate value of the project? What's the life cycle value of it, looking at it that way?
Payoff was 17 to 20 years, depending upon assumptions. So you get 5 to 10 years of free power.
And the MPV was like 4 million, right, for the single system.
39, yeah.
So that's the city would.
But that's exclusive of the environmental, that's exclusive of the landfill. So we don't have that number yet in terms of, so.
Okay.
Well, I think it's also important to consider technological improvements over those 20 years. Just as an example, I have solar collectors on my roof that are 10 years old. The efficiency of current solar panels are 30% more than my panels. So if I all of a sudden replace my panels with new panels at 30% efficiency, I would generate, 30% more energy on the same surface. And when we're talking 20 years, that's a long time for technological changes. So there will be improvements that we can make use of within that 20 years that will reduce some of this cost. It's inevitable.
Yeah.
The other subtlety to be aware of from a budgeting standpoint, if it's behind the meter, you're able to realize that as a savings in your operating costs. If it is in front of the meter, you still have to pay all that electric out front, so your budgets do not get reduced. You just get a miscellaneous revenue stream as your net metering revenue.
Right. And maybe this is for Michael, compared to other projects that you've looked at. What's the payback period that you typically see in these municipal solar installations? And are we 16 years because of the big cost to get the power off the site, either to Jones Ave or to the high school?
No, this isn't too dissimilar than what I think we would normally see. I mean, the challenge is if you were going to get it to the high school, and Christine mentioned this, you either have to do overhead lines and you have to kind of clear the space, the surrounding space, because you don't want branches and whatnot, falling on it and causing outages, or you have to do the trenching, and then to avoid the wetlands, you'd have to take a little bit of an awkward path, possibly go through the field. I think the baseball field is there. And so I think to me, that's kind of the bigger complication, and whether or not the city is interested in, whether like you wouldn't have access to that field, or if you decided to trench it for some amount of time while you're doing the trenching, or if the city was okay with kind of that necessary clearance for the overhead lines. So I think in terms of payback, this is pretty similar, but there are some of those other circumstances and scenarios that I think need to be taken under consideration.
Yeah, I think the wetlands is a big factor, but also the tree clearing. Those are some really nice old pine trees and established forest out there. That would be hard to part with, I think.
Yes, and the athletic fields have their own constituency too. So I love that. So that's a fact.
Yeah, I would not overstate the trees issues because these are renewable sources. Within the 20 years, you'll see the trees grow back. So it's not a permanent harm.
These aren't 20-year-old trees. They're hundreds of years old.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
They're big pines.
They're big
pines.
pines. Oh, yeah.
But anyway,
They're
I mean,
trees.
Yeah.
we're planning for the future, and that could be
Oh, I
part.
understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Just putting it out there.
Mhm.
We could explore too, a portion of buried and overhead, the mix, depending upon, maybe you get over some of those wetlands, go overhead and just go buried through the woods. So I mean, but you still have to maintain that after the fact, it'll be a private line that, we either would have to contract it out, because we don't have, that type of expertise.
Burying is probably safer for everybody. Maintenance.
Yeah,
and
it's from a
everything.
maintenance standpoint, yes. But there's still maintenance. You gotta be on top of it.
Is there, Mike, I didn't see anything about line loss. Is that a factor here, like the distance it has to travel?
So there is line loss, but it's a relatively short travel, so I wouldn't think that'd be too much of an issue.
Okay, thank you.
Getting back to the life cycle question. So you said the life cycle is like 30 years or something like that? What happens after 30 years? You have to replace all the photovoltaics, or do you have to?
That would be a question for Mike.
Inverters also?
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be degradation of the panels over time. So, I mean, I think there would have to be a strategy around, do you want to replace it? Replace it over time? Do you want at the 30-year mark? You can just go with whatever is still, it's going to be producing, but at kind of a lower amount. Ben asked about the lifetime of the inverter. So there might be other equipment that would have to be replaced. So I think it's kind of a strategic decision about, the equipment itself, the initial equipment, last 20 to 30 years. Do you have a longer term plan? And I think that would then influence like how you want to treat that over the course of the initial 20 to 30 year span. If you want to replace the equipment I think there's discussion, just now about technological advancements. Do you want to replace panels as they fail with new panels? Do you want to wait until the very end and then replace everything? Or do you say this is just a 20 or 30 year project and then we're going to remove it and do something else with that land? So I think there's a couple different options, but I think that requires a little bit of forethought in terms of a little bit, like a strategic vision of how you'd want to treat that.
My understanding from other places and other countries, that most of the time what happens is panels will degrade, but they're never going to be zero. It's just, you got nowadays current ones are like 18% efficient, let's say, from solar to electricity. So they will degrade, And then maybe after 20 years, they go down to 12 or 10%. And then that's when you'd have to decide whether newer technology at the time is worth swapping out, or you want to run this to 5% or something. I mean, the return is going to be less over that period of time. When they say 25 years, that's pretty much what they're saying. The 18% will be around for 25 years. That's pretty much what they like to guarantee. But beyond that, it's not going to be zero. It's going to be just going down. So that's the point where you'd have to make a decision whether new panels are worth it. Very similar to lighting products, at some point you say, hey, newer products are more efficient, so I can get my return in 3 years. Do I replace them? They're still okay, they're still functioning, but better ones are out there. So it's the same thing with these panels.
Would it be true to say that some components of the system have a longer life than 30 years, like the interconnects and the scaffolding and all that? So you wouldn't necessarily have to replace everything, you're just replacing this, the kind of the active component, the electronic components.
Yeah, the inverters, as Ben was saying, they go about every 10 years.
Yeah, that's right. Inverters about 10 years. Yeah.
But the conductor would stay, the housings, all of that stuff.
The metal racking for the panels would have a longer lifetime.
Yeah.
Michael, I think that this was in the appendix slide, but we went through those really quickly. The rate you used for escalating electricity prices, do you know what that is?
2.5.
A year?
I think it's
2.5% a year.
what it was.
2.5%?
Everybody knows predicting future energy costs is a.
It was called out as 2.5%, and then system degradation at 0.5% a year.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. I mean, that's something to consider right now.
Yeah.
Specifically with what's happening.
Does your model tell you prior to the 16 years, is it cash flow positive or negative?
I think the 16 years is where I would break even. Is your question?
In other words, if you're paying the bond off,
Mhm.
are you bringing in more money than your expenses in debt service, maintenance, etc.?
Yeah, good question. I unfortunately our financial guru couldn't make it tonight, but let me follow up on that and I can get you an answer on that. That's a good question.
I know we looked at Exeter and, they wanted to own it because they looked at the long term and it's much more beneficial, as you found. But they also found that it was minimally positive cash flow, $30,000 to $50,000 a year, until they paid off the bond, and then, of course, they're getting very big revenue.
But with that is a fixed rate, right? The electricity they're paying, I mean, the rate they're paying for that electricity is fixed.
Right.
Is that his power purchase agreement?
Well, no, they own it.
Oh, they
So
own
it's part of, they're not paying anything so that's a side benefit, especially given what we were just talking about.
Right, you're not gonna have energy costs go up because you know the energy demand.
You're independent.
Got it.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
and it's not just the supply side too, it's the delivery side that's, even more expensive than the supply side at this point. So avoiding the supply delivery is a nice thing. And even if you continue to take it off the grid, you can help flatten your peak demands. So you reduce that peaking rate. So that's a positive thing too.
is if you're behind the meter, is it possible for us to continue to power parts of Portsmouth's municipalities even when the grid goes down?
Not unless you have a battery.
No, that's a
Right. Right. Usually no, because the utility is worried about potential backfeeding, which can be a safety concern for the linemen.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you designed and built the system to accommodate the.
Yeah, get it.
That might just increase the cost a little bit.
Yeah,
Yes,
of course.
So did we include delivery cost saving? Let's say we're behind the meter at the high school.
Yeah, it's all in.
It's all hill. And we got the cost savings, the lack of rise in.
And Mike, because we're primarily targeting a behind the meter play, didn't really look at solar plus storage, right?
That's correct. Storage was not modeled as part of this.
If you were in front of the meter, you might want to think a little bit more about it to maximize the value, but that wasn't our focus on here. That's beyond the program.
That's correct. And also, I'm not sure if Eversource in New Hampshire has gone to more of a net billing as opposed to a net metering construct, but if there's differentiated values of when the export occurs, that's when adding a battery can make a lot of sense. That's kind of the California model, where they've got hours in the early to late evening that are kind of more valuable on a kWh basis than when solar normally produces. So storing the energy in a battery and then exporting in those high value hours gets you a better return.
I don't think we have dynamic rates here.
No, we don't have time is time.
Not even close, Mike. Look for your die button.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
First
Ways
guys go.
off. Other questions? I guess what we're hearing is the easier payback is the behind the meter rooftops. Parenthetic, when we had our NREL folks analyze the sewer plants, they said you've got an opportunity at the Pease sewer plant for solar. They ran some numbers on that. And it was promising. So we have that data on file.
Is it possible to package up all of those into one overall effort as opposed to looking at them one off?
It is. We actually had, what was the name of that company that, E&E's, subsidiary. They're doing work with the high school. But we had that done already.
Yeah.
So we looked at our buildings and said, here's solar arrays at these locations.
Peas, Matt.
And they would love to have a contract to go ahead and do that.
Yeah, I guess what I was saying is that to have an overall project that funds all of them and moves forward with them all in concert.
Sure,
as
one
opposed-
bond issue.
Yeah,
As opposed to, chipping away at them.
yeah.
And if it's
And the one thing about the landfill is it's a lot of power, because it's a big area, so maybe if you combined all the, it might come close to that.
right, but it's one bond, one vote, which is appealing
Mhm.
politically.
Mhm.
We're having a bake sale. Really big one.
I think there was a last bait sale already done. The book
Peter,
has,
what other buildings did they consider as a part of that? Like, did we look at Little Harbor School or other school properties?
No, it looked at the municipal buildings
Okay,
and the water and sewer plants.
okay. Does Little Harbor need a new roof?
I don't currently manage that property.
I wish she did.
The middle school was built with a solar ready hot water system. I don't know if it would work for electric, but that feature. And the Foundry Garage, I believe.
The top floor of the fountain
Yeah.
garage.
that would,
Not a lot of energy demand in that building though, so it's,
Oh, right,
uh,
right.
I just want to clarify one more thing on our pro forma. Do we have the cost of the buried line? Or is that a city side cost that we don't have in this?
it's in there,
Okay.
but it's an opinion of cost at this point.
Yeah, sure.
So until we do an actual design, we don't know the true cost. But it was about twice the cost of the overhead lines.
Right. And then but we've got a pro forma that shows the 16-year payback with all that baked in. And is there any other cost that's not in the pro forma?
The landfill work to meet DES requirements,
Right.
any additional mitigation relative to wetlands impacts.
And the DES permitting, right?
and the DES permitting.
Kind of the nitty gritty.
And wetlands impacts can be very expensive.
Just the permitting.
Yeah, just in terms of cash, you just
Yeah.
gotta, they,
Permit and the mitigation.
and the mitigation, they want you to pay money to mitigate.
Who are you paying?
DES, Department of Environmental Service,
State, federal?
state.
State, yeah. Underfunded.
Funded by fees.
Zippy and I.
I haven't heard of. So any order of magnitude figure? 300,000.
For the buried line,
No, all the permitting.
300,000 is a great guess.
As good as any.
You know, until you sit down and you start talking to the DES, you touch the landfill, yes, you can do it. But what does that mean? You know, does it mean you're reworking the slopes? Does it mean you're readjusting the cap? Does it mean what does that mean?
Right.
And part of it's like, you gotta do the geotechnical, and are they using, what kind of anchoring system are they using? You know, I would think they'd use a ballasted system,
Right, just have.
to minimize the penetration and.
Oh, you'd have to do that.
Yeah.
Can't.
I know when we explored it the last time to build walking trails around it, they added a lot of requirements to do that. And it stopped us kind of, let's not do that right now.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. We'll obviously get the slides. If we had some more deliberation and had follow-up questions, could we send a email list of questions?
Absolutely.
And I've got a couple follow-up questions from tonight as well, so we'll work on those too.
Thank you, Mike.
A question on the timelines. What is the assumption as to when it would start? Like, if we wanted to get this going, when would we have to give you a?
We would need to have funding authorization. And then we'd need to do a proposal for typically a design build effort. So we would identify, get the funding, identify a responsible party contractor to do the work. And
So what I'm asking though is the timeline that completed in December of 2027. What would have to be a start date in order to make that? Given the assumption.
4 months ago.
Yeah. ASAP.
Yeah. I mean, we're not comfortable with even shooting for that, just because of we don't want to rush, especially the permitting, especially, if you go to the DES and say, we have to get the landfill thing done, they'll say, oh, here's what you got to do. Instead of like taking the time to say, well, and really drilling down into it.
Okay.
Yeah, it'd be a nice to have, but we know that it will pay for itself.
And the landfill's not going anywhere. This is not precluding any future actions. This is just like, we recommend at this point going for the low hanging fruit.
So in that case, can we redo the numbers? Assuming we're not going to make December 2027 with either option. Would it be worth redoing the numbers with that in mind?
One of the options already assumes that. Oh, I'm sorry, Peter, go ahead.
We're saying neither option is going to be able to be done by then. So can we redo it, assuming that neither option is going to be able to make that date?
No, I'm sorry. The split, the two systems assumes that we make the date and that we get the tax credits. The combined, the single 1.7 megawatt system assumes that date is not made because there's going to be an affected system operator study, and then just the study review process for both Eversource and the ISO is going to make you not hit the ITC credit timeline.
Right.
Although Mike, if you didn't get the ITC on the 2 array option, you thought it was another million.
Yes, actually, our last slide shows it would be just pure construction cost. They did break that down. So the one system, if you did it, would be 4,466,000. The single system would be 3,909,000.
So
Yep. Cheaper to build one system as opposed to two.
And if you build one, the best payback is if you just tap into the grid, as I recall, if I got that right. At Jones Ave, or is it? No, it's better if we go to the high school.
assuming we can use all that power at the high school,
Right.
which is a pending question.
Well, you know, it'd be an interesting thing to do is look at converting our gas heated water system
Yeah.
and using
pool.
electricity at the pool.
At the pool, yeah.
So we could, I mean, we could explore that too, but again, it's one of those things, it's like, you know,
Another project.
another project, and it's just a matter of, you know, when it's not something that's gonna be done today. You know, what our recommendation is to look at the areas that we can in short term, whether we package it into one big program or whether we just, you know, the DPW just had a new addition put on, and we know that roof is ready and available. Get a price for that relatively quickly. Actually, we have a price for that from the consultant that we'd worked with. So, I mean, there's some things that we could probably package up relatively quickly.
And we can give you the analysis of Pease wastewater treatment and solar.
Yeah, Pease is going into construction for the next 2 years. So I would say that's not gonna be happening immediately. That would need to, you know, after, when that's construction is done, be a good time to look at it.
Yeah, and I can't remember, do you guys remember, was it ground mounted or rooftop? I can't remember.
Did Herb with NREL?
Yeah, it was ground. It's ground.
So one of the things they may not have been aware of is all the buried utilities. It looks like there's open grass everywhere, but there's a lot of piping underneath all that grass. So we would not want to put things on top of it that we couldn't get out of the way quickly. I mean, the Tony Ron Park is right next to it. If the softball field wanted to be converted into solar array, that would be a great source of power for the treatment plant.
On the other side is wetland, right?
On the other side, no, it's right there.
The other side of Tony Row, the opposite side.
Yeah.
Than Tony Row, isn't that?
More space.
No,
That's clear.
it's clear. It's between Tony Run and the treatment plant is high ground.
High ground, okay.
Yeah.
What about the man?
But that wouldn't, the softball field is sacred, so that's not going anywhere.
What about Madbury?
Now there's more room in Madbury that could be looked at. I was up there the other day taking a look at that. That'd be an opportunity to add some additional capacity.
But we put it behind the meter there already, so we only have so much capacity left, or do we know?
We generate about 30%
Oh.
of the power of the plant.
Yeah.
Yep. So that, I mean, that'd be great.
Yeah.
I have a question. This is MC. If it's determined that there's better uses of city dollars on other sites, packaged up perhaps as a multi-project bond, would we then consider the PPA for the sewer site? Like, is that back on the table at all? It's a lower value, but lower cost also, right?
So we'd be more than willing to entertain both. The PPA, we're a little gun shy on these power purchase agreements. They're often structured with floors, electric floors, and if electrical prices don't go up at the projections, their power purchase agreement still goes up. So it can be disadvantaged, not to our benefit. So I mean, we're gun shy. We're better off owning the array, putting it directly into the system. That's the highest value to the city.
Got it.
Okay.
We would explore that as well, because as you alluded to, you don't have to pay for it, you don't have to bond it up front. It's just paid for as part of your expenses, your operating costs.
So how would we go about looking at that low hanging fruit? If we wanted to pursue that as you recommend.
We have a current CIP element sheet that says explore power solar arrays. With that being approved by council, we would move forward as we've, similar to what we've done on this. The direction was to explore Jones Ave. So, we would turn our attention to these other areas and make them happen.
Right. And that's something we can go to the council and say, this is the quickest payback. We get carbon savings towards a climate action plan with the most financial benefit out of the gate.
Yep.
And longer term, we've got a landfill that it's possible to develop. It'd be interesting to know if it was cash flow positive year to year while you're paying off debt. I think the debt were structured so it's got a spin down, and the later years, you're getting revenue, hopefully revenue growth and less debt. Maybe that looks more enticing. And then after 16 years, it's free and clear. So, the financial benefits seem to me nothing to sniff at. It's just not nearly as low hanging fruit as the rooftop. So that capital element sheet.
Yeah, I mean, and Betsy pointed out, the potential of creating a microgrid and feeding that condo association nearby. I mean, that's a public-private partnership that would have to be explored, and that's a lot of legwork. And getting a condo association to agree to creating its own power grid to tie into a solar array, although it may make sense, it's a challenge to get condo associations to agree on paint colors, let alone electricity.
Those are condos, they're not rentals.
I think they're apartments.
But
You're talking
I
about
think it's
Tidewatch?
ownership, but it's a condo association.
Tidewatch.
Oh, you're talking about Tidewatch.
No, I'm not talking about Tidewatch. I'm talking about the brand new condos that went up where the old radio station was.
Sorry, I thought you were talking about the other side.
Yeah, they're apartments. Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
next to the gas
I
station.
have
there.
radio.
Yeah.
That would be a one landlord conversation, but again, like that puts it on a longer timeline, not an immediate action plan, but yeah, and thinking more about it, Ben, I don't know if that's virtual net metering or if that could be a behind the meter initiative.
Yeah, I mean, whenever you go into Eversource's grid, you're paying Eversource a lot to do that.
Yeah.
Which they deserve,
It's a good question.
They have to maintain the system.
Maintain those poles.
I'm glad you followed up with that. Thank you.
Yeah. Give credit where credit is due.
Okay. Well, thank you very, very much. Please send us the slides. Send them to Stephanie and she'll
I have them, so I'll distribute.
get those out to us. That's great. And then we'll deliberate a little more on means and ask you further questions. But I think we've got our clear recommendation from you.
All right.
Thanks for the
See
update.
everybody.
Thank you.
Nice job.
Yeah.
Peter.
Thank you, everyone.
Stick around for the next conversation.
Okay. CPCNH. Big date coming up, April 20th. So I'm gonna be part of that work session.
So what we typically do is we look at end condition.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great job.
Thank you very much.
Christine.
So we've been. He's locked. He's locked.
Oh,
No, I think he's just leaning against it.
Oh.
I didn't close it all the way. He pulled it shut.
He's letting him know about Spinnaker right now.
He likes it spinning.
So true.
I have you.
You have some. Well, while we're waiting, maybe Tom, you had the latest board meeting.
So I'm trying to think of, since we talked a month ago, Henry Herndon is now the executive director. Had that happened? Okay. So he's been hired he's no longer, he was acting general manager for a long time, but now he's the executive director. So the job search for the it's not CFO, it's
Financial director.
financial director and the director of power procurement are moving ahead. The power procurement, I haven't seen them yet, but they're pretty close. So that sort of leadership team is coming together. It looks like should be together by like the end of May. So that's good movement.
Including a finance person.
Including a finance person. Yeah, so it was Henry as executive director, and then the power procurement, it will be the next one. There's a couple finalists being looked at right now, and then the financial one is the last one looking, but they've got candidates lined up there too. So all three of them should be filled soon. And that's a big step. It was delayed with kind of an extended search for the executive director, but I think things will move a lot quicker now.
My thought was, just in the interest of using our time well, just to hear from each of you what you think the salient facts in this question that Anne Bagley has posed are, and what your thoughts are on it. Does that make sense? Just go around the table and get everybody, so everybody has a chance. You want to go first, Kevin?
I'd like to. I mean, just as a general.
Point of order. Can we call the question first? Bagley's question that we're going to respond to.
What question we're responding to?
Oh. His motion is report back from the city manager on withdrawing from CPCNH.
Thank you. Whether to withdraw.
Withdraw.
Thank you.
So my just general comment, I have a lot of specific thoughts, but just general comment on that is, I kind of look at it, two broad assumptions. One, if CPCNH can demonstrate that they're stabilizing their operations and their financial situation and can be competitive in the market. I mean, and those are a lot of ifs, but I mean, if they're kind of answering all the right questions and the proof's in the pudding, but assuming that they can be a viable player and be stable. And my other assumption is that in the market, we do a much better job of communicating to customers, residents, ratepayers, whatever you want to call them, their ability to switch back and forth between default service and CPCNH. I'm kind of putting the other for-profit suppliers aside, but being the two big players in the market are your regulated utilities and CPCNH. And I am adamant that we need to do a better job of communicating, because this is going to be the market going forward, out into over the horizon. We need to do a better job, and I don't mean just, as a city, but CPCNH, the consumer advocate, the PUC, just making it crystal clear the ability to switch back and forth, and also to have really good transparency around what the rate is at any point in time. When there's new rates come out, here's CPCNH's rate, here's the utility rates, and it's not, a press release by CPCNH or CPCNH that doesn't include the utility rate. I mean, there just has to be more transparency. And so it creates a market that customers know they can move back and forth and make it easy. And I think already it's pretty easy. So assumption is financial stability and operational stability with CPCNH, and we do a better job of communicating in the market. Then I think, and this is to the council members' question, I think it would be very short-sighted to take the option away of having CPCNH in the market for Portsmouth customers, because it's another option. What happens if the next rate period or the rate period after that, all of a sudden CPCNH is lower? And what's the answer now to Portsmouth customers? Why did we take that option away from them? in terms of being able to be a member of CPCNH. So I just think it's short-sighted. It might feel good to kind of pursue withdrawing when they're down and their prices have been higher now for 3 periods. I think most recently there's some rationale for it, perhaps. But they have a lot of splaining to do, as you know, they say, in terms of proving that they've improved their operation. But I think to kind of pull the plug now on that organization for our residents would be short-sighted, because you know we've been up and running for 7 rate periods. 4 rate periods, CPCNH has been lower. Now we've had 3 periods where they've been higher. Who knows, based on what the market costs have been recently, what's going to happen with the utilities come August 1st. And to pursue a withdrawal at this point, in my mind, I think I would have preferred that the ask be that CPCNH come before the council and demonstrate and explain what has transpired and demonstrate their improvement strategy. I think that would have been a more kind of hold the organization to the fire ask, and to have a work session around that, as opposed to have a work session talking about how do we withdraw. That's my kind of introductory statement.
And I think the second part of that deliberation at the council level was those of us who felt like you did, said, we don't know enough to know whether to withdraw. We need a work session. And so that's
right
how we arrived at where we are. But succinctly stated. Peter?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of the things that Kevin just said. But I'd like to bring us back to a time when there was no CPNH, where there were third-party players that people could choose that locked in a certain term, 6 months, 12 months, whatever, for a particular rate and a particular green energy component. And people could do that even before all this happened. What they couldn't do is they couldn't switch back and forth. If they decided, oh my gosh, Eversource is now better, they couldn't switch. They were locked in for 6 months or 12 months. And it seems to me that Community Power has given the best of both worlds. They said, look, we're going to give you some choices, but you can switch anytime you want. And I think Kevin's right that we need to be very transparent about what our rates are, what the default utilities rate is, and say to customers, you are welcome anytime to switch or switch back, whichever you prefer. You're not locked in as you used to be when you had third-party vendors doing this. The second component of that really is our city's goals. I mean, it's very good to kind of beat our chest to say, we want to be green, we want to do something for climate change. You know, a very small step really for most people. And, you know, we don't have a lot of people in Portsmouth that are impoverished somehow, and to say that they couldn't pay the utility bills. But if you can't, you go for the lowest. Everyone will do that, and they should. But if you want to take a small step and you want to support more green energy, you can do that through Community Power. And that helps the goal of our city. It makes you feel good that you're doing something, even if it's a minimal amount. And for those people where the money is really sparse and you got to save a lot, you have every opportunity to switch out to a better deal and switch back when Community Power is a better deal for you. So it seems to me there's a lot of flexibility of being part of this group. So to say we want to get out of this group, why would you want to do that? That throws people into the default utilities basket where they can't switch back and forth anytime they want. Now they're locked in with the utility, okay? So it seems to me it gives utility customers more choices. It gives them opportunities to make choices they can't make otherwise. And it guarantees them the right to get out or in anytime they wish. And I think Kevin's right that Community Power needs to publicize those aspects to say, what is our rate? What is the rate of the default utility? And what is your options if you want to go for the lowest price? We should tell them upfront. That's it's your choice. And that's part of our selling, our community power, that you have this choice that you didn't have before we came along as a group. And you're a big entity now. You're a second grade or a second level player in the utility market, and you're not obligated to make a profit. You're a nonprofit entity, okay? Which means it's so when you think about let's say, if the scenario had been different here in New Hampshire, if Governor Ayotte had embraced offshore wind, for example, then community power would be a great opportunity to buy local green power right off the coast of Maine, if it was available. Unfortunately, it isn't right now, but those are the kind of future opportunities that are going to be available at some point. And I don't know if the default utilities will be able to latch onto that as easily in New Hampshire. And of course, Eversource has done this every place else except in New Hampshire. But in New Hampshire, community power has more flexibility to act like that. So I think there's a lot of advantages that we have for our customers. And like Kevin was saying, many of the half years rates that we had saved people money. And now these three rates did not. And we have to explain that, and we have to make sure that is not going to happen again, that we're not going to be blindsided by getting into business with a situation that would make us eat up all our reserves. So anyway.
Good. Let's go to somebody on Zoom. Betsy, you want to go?
Sorry, did you just call my name?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to jump because I've got to put my kids to bed. But I agree with the previous points made. I think it's about freedom of choice, and for me personally, it allowed me to purchase 100% renewable energy product, which was something I wanted to do, and it gave me the flexibility to do that. And I think, hopefully we're getting through the bad parts with CNH early, like fail fast. And now moving into the better parts of it. And hopefully, we should be encouraging that we give this the necessary time, provided that consumers have an option to switch out if for whatever reason they need or want to.
Great. Okay. And thanks for being with us. I know you got your hands full at home. So.
All good. Thanks for your patience with me. I missed you guys the last few months. I'll be back next month.
Yeah. MC, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. Not a ton to add. But I'm having a hard time seeing everyone's faces, and I'm also new to the group, so I can't identify the first speaker. But the first speaker spoke about kind of like the buckets of assumptions of, is CPCNH on a path towards solvency? And then the secondary bucket of assumptions around choice, is it understood and is it valued? And I'll just say I think we just spoke about, I like what Betsy was saying about choice and its value within our community. But on the issue of solvency, I did in the Consumer Advocate blog that you sent around recently, or that was sent around, I can't recall who.
Yep.
That might have been a new counselor.
Yeah.
There was a chart that showed that CPCNH was able to restore its reserves in November 2025 up to around 7 million. And I think they're just suffering the casualty of being a transparent organization. And I think we're going to see, Eversource rates maybe not catch up, but truly jump at the next time's rates are set. And so I think that making a move now, when we've seen CPCNH make the right steps towards solvency, we just heard about some financial hires that are pretty interesting, and getting themselves a little more organized. I think we might be, they might be on the right path. And so those risks are being mitigated. And there's just going to be increasing pressure on Eversource in the meantime. So I'm very curious to see where we're headed, but I wouldn't, I guess for me, it feels early to make a decision.
Right. Okay, and thanks for reading all this stuff. Your colleagues have been sending me various things and I've been pushing them out so that.
Oh, yes, and I apologize. Sorry, that was rookie move, for sure. But yeah, I think it was just, my first, that was, I don't know, the day after, a couple days after taking a stab at starting to break down the question. And the initial question for me is like, where are rates headed for CPCNH and Eversource as a comparator? And I think that I think that it's going to be in CPC, not in their favor, but I think we're going to see perhaps more stable rates. Perhaps, I mean, I'd be curious to hear Ben's thoughts. Whereas we're going to see quite a jump at the next round of rate setting for Eversource.
Yeah. No. Okay. Yeah, and it was a smart analysis. So let's see. Brent?
So I think that CPC&H should commit to a timeline when they're going to be solvent and when they're going to have competitive rates. They should be able to say, as of this date, we're going to be there for you, as opposed to just wondering when it's going to happen. So I think that's an answer they should be able to present to the city council about what they're able to do. And then just one other thing is that my understanding, I may be wrong, but is that New Hampshire electrical rates are high compared to other states. So there must be some fundamental reasons why that's true. And that's another thing that we should ask long-term CPC&H to address. Why is electricity so expensive in New Hampshire?
It's not New Hampshire, it's New England. All of New England is similar.
Regardless, it's so.
Well, it's not just our state being
Yeah,
singled
yeah,
out. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But there should be some ways we can remedy that over time.
It's been going on for a long time.
Yeah.
And
Okay, that's all I had to say.
No, that's great.
yeah.
Ben?
Okay, I want to start with a disclaimer that these are my thoughts and my thoughts only. I have no information related to what Eversource's default service reconciliation will be or what some of the fundamentals there are. So these are just my thoughts. I'm going to start with restructuring, and the promise of restructuring was to break up the vertically integrated utilities, have competition for generation, have competition for default supply service. Everyone was supposed to go to third-party suppliers 25 years ago. You know who does it? Very, very few people. It's a highly under-mature market.
Yep.
And I think CPC&H is a meaningful step in the right direction for fulfilling that vision. With that said, when we started out, there was a structural advantage that CPC&H had. The utilities were required to purchase their default service deals under very tight conditions that aren't that advantageous.
Yep.
During that time frame, CPC&H had a structural advantage and we enjoyed savings. Kind of a no-brainer when we migrated. Since that time, there have been changes to the legal and regulatory frameworks. I understand that they may be considering changes again after this extraordinary coldest winter we've had in 20 years, most expensive winter we've ever had in terms of wholesale prices. So given that there is this structural advantage that's then taken away, will it come back? We don't know, but there is some change afoot in the framework of how this whole situation works. That said, I have not yet seen a competency around active management of the portfolio. When we started this journey, we talked about a couple of different models. There was the broker model, there was the active management model, there was an index model. There were various ways to do this, and we chose to go with active management. And active management is the riskiest way to do this. Potentially some additional upside, but it's very hard to get this right on a regular and consistent basis. So I think it's important for us to just be eyes wide open about that. And to date, I have not been comfortable that CPC&H does a good job of that just yet. Maybe some of these new hires will help with that. Maybe some growing pains and learning will help with that. But I really want to see that before I have a stronger sense of whether we should withdraw or stay. I'm willing to give them some more time and some benefit of the doubt, but I do need to see that. I thought your recommendation or suggestion to come before the city council and explain what it is we're doing, I think is a step in the right direction. That said, we've seen a sequence of adverse circumstances, blown PPA deal, actions outside the policy, cost of hedges adding cost, change in laws and regulations, refreshing at a time of higher rates, stumble after stumble after stumble after stumble. I hope we learn something from all of these things. And I think it is perhaps sometimes unwise to make a decision in the midst of a lot of things like that. And it might make sense to make a more educated decision about whether to stay or to go once things normalize a bit. Now, I'm aware that we can't give folks a blank check forever. I'm not sure I'm quite there yet, but I understand the concern, and I think it is entirely valid. And for that reason, I think Kevin's suggestion to have an extra push around transparency, about rate impacts, about switching back and forth, I think are absolutely right on and where we need to put our effort and focus. Because I'm not ready to recommend that the city withdraw, but if the residents can take active management and do the thing to mitigate the impacts to themselves, they're not going to get hit with that extra $25, $30 for the households where that's a really important consideration. So for those reasons, I am concerned, but still on the bus.
And just before I forget, I know the consumer advocate should be screaming from the rooftop when rates come out to remind the citizens, because he is a consumer advocate for all residents in the state, not just CPCNH.
Yeah.
He should be making it crystal clear. He should be having press releases reminding folks about the ability to switch and what the rates are combined. You know, if CPCNH isn't doing it or the PUC doesn't require it, then the consumer advocate should be the one who is really using all the, you know, his bully pulpit to make sure the residents in New Hampshire know what the rates are and their ability to switch. Because right now it's happening, but it's happening just kind of very, you know, check the box, we did it. And it's not real. And low income customers have no clue. And those are the customers that really are bothering. It bothers me that we have low income customers paying more than they need to right now.
Okay.
Sorry, I
That's
took more time.
Good deep analysis, Ben. Tom.
Thanks, Ben. I certainly don't understand the markets like Ben does, but I really appreciate the way you started out with the restructured market being, 25 years in the past, and we're kind of getting there. So, and I also agree, being on the board of CPCNH, that they have a lot to answer for. There's been several missteps to begin with, but I'll start out by saying, I don't think withdrawing now makes any sense, like for the reasons that we've already discussed. But around the market mechanism and their advantage coming in, I feel that them entering the market, doing, forming, has impacted the way that default rates are determined and the way that the utilities go out and do that. So they're having a positive impact even with all the missteps. So, but we're in a situation now where the rates are a lot higher. They had been lower, now they're higher. So yeah, we need to be watching out for the residents of Portsmouth. But I think one of the reasons that we discussed, and we put the stickies up on the board about why we would think this is a good idea, was not entirely rate driven. And so I think what I would like to just point out is I think we're involved. Ideally, we're not going to stay involved if rates stay high, but we were involved for a number of other things, including the representation by CPCNH in Concord to have another voice for clean energy, for alternative rate structures, or other things that we wouldn't necessarily, we're not going to be able to push as a municipality. That New Hampshire-based clean energy development. So there's been one project, Poverty Plains and Warner, that they were able to get behind. They got 11 communities to buy the power and take the RECs, and now that's the largest community solar development in the state. So even with all the issues they've run into, they've managed to have some successes there. And then the potential, if we can get through, and all the things that Ben said, absolutely true. If we can get through, we've talked a lot about the future potential, right? So we have the potential for the alternative rates for Portsmouth to maybe either with other towns or on our own, look at developing our own projects, 5, 6 years from now, the discussion we just had about solar, maybe we're tapping into some of the reserves that we've accumulated to put into those types of projects, or do a low income efficiency program funded by the city. So all of those things, and just pointing out too, that the community choice aggregators in California are about 10 plus years ahead of us in this concept. And they're doing it, right? So it's happening, they're seeing all the benefits. So it's very possible but there's things that CPCNH has to get right. And I think they're on the right path. I think, the leadership, the board taking a more advisory role and less operational role is going to be very healthy for the organization. And so, yeah, I would say pretty much backing the idea that, yeah, it's not just carte blanche. But withdrawing now isn't a good idea, but I think keeping an eye on things and, determining in the next year or two whether we're completely on board.
And those long range benefits that the other aggregations, Compact or California.
Right.
Those are real. It takes time to mature into those, but they're real. Tracy.
So much more articulate and informed than I am, and I agree with all of that. My wish would be not to withdraw from CPCNH because I do think the long-term benefits are there and it does provide pressure on the utilities, et cetera. My concern is also with the low-income residents. I think I talked about the nonprofit I'm on, and so we fund these gap things that people, come into hard times. And electricity is just more and more of an issue. And in fact, today I had one we do a lot with Portsmouth Housing, and it was Portsmouth Housing Authority electric bill, and it was CPCNH that they're paying. So those people are not looking at their bill. They are not reading the notices saying you can switch. So that's my concern, is that we're not, even if we're transparent, we're maybe not making the effort to get, I think somebody had mentioned in the notes from last month, maybe we put out an energy blog, but it's such a complicated thing. People don't understand that, and there needs to be more education on how the whole electricity system works. So that's my biggest concern. And I guess a question, can Portsmouth Housing Authority be a carve out? Like, should they be on CPCNH? I don't know.
They have their own contract.
Yeah, they have a separate contract.
They have it. So
Third party
fortunately, they're
contract,
not
I believe,
affected.
right? Third
Yeah,
party?
third party.
Yeah, so.
But you talk about low income customer, and that's where CPCNH, I think, has to have more genuine interest on that topic. When we asked when folks were here in November, it was almost like,
So I did follow up.
we can't do that.
The utilities won't share the information.
Yeah, but if there was an advocation between the consumer advocate with the PUC saying this is a very, this customer base in the state is at risk, there could be changes, just like they're making changes in a lot of other sticky regulatory matters.
Legislative.
There could be changes that give CPCNH better access to do outreach to low-income customers. They're kind of just saying it's tough.
I think it's hard to put that on CPCNH and
see, but they should be interested in trying to fix it. That's what I'm
But the
saying.
PUC could order them to do that.
absolutely.
So we could put pressure on the PUC.
There could be, that's what I'm just saying. In addition to getting their act together, which hopefully they're on the right path, there's the whole issue around communications and advocacy and making sure customers know the ability to switch back and forth. At the end of the day, what's the risk of even having CPCNH present if you can switch at any point in time?
Everybody knows.
Right? Because for this next 6 months, we might be higher than the utility, but the next 6 might be lower. Why ever lock customers out of the choice?
I think the
If
risk is
the
that,
ability to switch, but nobody's switching, that's the thing. And they think people are not switching because they want to stay with CPCNH. That's malarkey, as some people would say. They're switching because they don't even pay attention. They're not looking at it and saying, oh, I want to pay more.
Inertia.
That's not why the attrition rate is low, believe me.
Tracy,
They're not zealots for.
but the only
Yeah.
concern is we've made that the default. So I think that's
Right.
where it
Yeah.
becomes, you
Right.
know, problematic.
Yeah, my own thoughts are, I have these concerns. Are they well capitalized enough to be working in this arena? And do they have a plan to get, well, better capitalized? You know, they only have rates. They can't levy an assessment on the towns. They can't do anything like that. And it has been a series of mistakes. The wood chip plant, the, you know, letting the CEO go, or he left, or whatever happened. And
Policy compliance.
policy compliance, you know, but I take comfort in the fact that they've increased their hedging. They've got stronger policies there, and they're filling out their staff. You know, I'd say at this point, I'm like, Ben, you got to show me that you're on the right track. That said, I think there's a big difference between individuals opting out and a whole town opting out.
Yes.
I do believe that the structure, the joint powers agreement, the cost sharing agreement, is the best way for consumers to have a lot of choice and get the buying power of 200,000 meters. And if they can stabilize, it should succeed the way it succeeded in other places that were the model. You know, the regulatory environment is another concern I have. That asking the utilities to buy 50% of their energy in the spot market really exposes all their customers to a lot of risk. And we just don't know how that's going to play out. And, you know, there was a bill to end that practice and go back to fixed contract buying. The Department of Energy said, no, we want to continue to push this idea of more buying in the spot market. So I don't know how that's going to play out. It may be some hybrid. So we don't know what the regulatory environment is. But at the end of the day, somebody really did a good job performing 4 rate periods out of 7. They have 2 bad rate periods, bad year. Do you fire them, so to speak? I think it's way too soon to do that. But I think they have to show us that they've got that they're going to get to the same place that other successful aggregations have gotten to. We need to see that. But I think it would be, I also just don't like the idea of, you know, pulling out and leaving our customers with just Eversource. You know, no offense, Ben, but that's a choice of one. Understood. And I also believe in the long-term benefits if we can get there.
The thing is too, we're in the 3rd rate period, and they started back in March of last year saying that the additional rate increase was to help build back the reserves.
Mm-hmm.
The reserves right now are below water by like $10 million because of market hits. The day had market issues that they're now experiencing. So we're 3 rate periods in, and they haven't made any progress towards their reserve building. And the minimum target for the cost sharing agreement is 60 days in reserve. They're projecting that that's not until 2028 are they going to get to 60 days, and that's the minimum. 120 is target. I think 150 or 180 is max. But I think they need to talk to us about, because they're going to have, it looks like, an additional reserve adder for the foreseeable future on top of the rate to build back the reserve. And they were always going to have some reserve adder because that's how they were building the reserve. But to what extent is it going to be extra? And we're going to have that additional rate for how long?
Yeah.
But we'll see. Who knows what happens in August? But
I do think,
you know,
I think everybody's selling power below their cost right now, right?
Under collecting, yeah.
Under collecting. And that's a tough situation because a big, well-capitalized company like Eversource can absorb that. Now, they shouldn't. And I think that's been a skirmish in Concord legislatively, is getting Eversource and Liberty and Unitil to true up quickly so that you get real price signals. And you know, that to me is a reason to keep CPS-CNH strong, is that they can continue to push for things like that in Concord.
that's to have a market between CPC&H and the utility. If that CPC&H didn't exist, it would be in the best interest of the utility to manage rolling out that cost increase so you don't have rate shock. You know, and that's what they would do historically, is kind of, let's have an agreement that we push it out over so we don't have rate shock. On one hand, the CPC&H kind of wants rate shock. You know, they're lobbying for rate shock so they can be, so that it's more apples to apples with their rate setting. But it's an interesting kind of position we're in now, because the utilities would push out that increase over a year or two just to levelize and not have rate shock in the past. And now they may be forced to introduce it in much, you know, a tighter window.
Right, but that also means that when they had a windfall, because electricity costs less than they're taking in, they would spread that out too. That's, you know, they'd lower rates more gradually.
Yeah.
So
I mean, there's always been a reconciliation, even with the former program where they bought in a tight window. There was always a reconciliation in the next rate period, but it tended to be kind of small.
Let me add two more comments there. Number one, I think, and I agree with what Ben was saying about there are too many variables now up in the air to make a decision long term until some of these things have been resolved. Number one, the Iran war is going to have a big impact on energy prices, specifically natural gas. It's going to be a big impact, and that's a big component of electricity generation. So we don't even know how that war is going to impact the pricing of natural gas in the next 6 months or so. Number two, and this goes to the idea that New Hampshire has these high rates, which actually New England has high rates, but customers don't pay rates. Customers pay bills. So as we know, our bills are distribution costs and supply costs. And when people open their bills every month, they're looking at the bottom line. That's what they want to know. How much is that going up or going down? And Eversource, and I say this a little bit with a lot of sympathy for Eversource. When I was in the legislature, Eversource is now, at least in New Hampshire, is locked into this model where most of their profits come from distribution and transmission areas, things that they install that they can get a guaranteed return on investment for. And I know Don Kreese has said a lot about this. He believes that their rate of return on a no-risk investment, so to speak, is too high by a couple percentage points. Okay. That goes into the distribution part of your bill. The other part, the supply part, is Eversource has to, by law, purchase the lowest cost they can get on where they find the energy. Currently, I think that's predominantly natural gas, and that's why I say the war in Iran will have an impact. Of course, we're impacted too as a community power coalition and partners. But what I'm saying is there are a lot of variables right now that are up in the air, and I think this is a bad time to make any dramatic decisions to begin with. And And when we say low-income people are having shock with their bills, they got to remember that that's not just the supply, that's also the distribution, and that has been going up for the last 20 years pretty dramatically. And some critics say a lot of the investment in distribution and transmission is overbuilt. Because if a utility knows they can overbuild it and still get 8 to 10% return on investment, no questions asked, they will do it. And that's the only way that Eversource can make a profit. That's the problem. If they had more vehicles and more revenue streams, which, for example, Green Mountain Power in Vermont does, which they are pretty much a holistic utility offering all kinds of services where they make profit from. Eversource in New Hampshire makes all its profits from the distribution transmission component. And they're locked into that pretty much because of New Hampshire legislature and the way PUC operates. So in any case, my main component is to say, let's not rush into decisions right now where too many variables are unknown.
Okay, anybody want the last word?
Counselor, could I just ask a question?
Yeah.
Do we know what, from a practical standpoint, what it would cost Portsmouth if we withdrew? A, B, one of the comments from 4 towns that were reported on NPR is, why would a town pull out when it doesn't cost you anything to be part of CPC&H? The customer issue is separate, but what would it cost Portsmouth to pull out of the agreement at a time that it's not costing us anything to be in it?
I don't think there is a cost. They
Yeah.
give you the timeline, Stephanie, that you'd have to stick around to not incur the cost.
So I'm talking.
Yeah, if you wanted to withdraw earlier, there would be a cost, or if you had additional reserves that we had built up reserves, you could put the reserves towards exiting. But the basic theory behind the termination process is CPC&H showing you the financials to how long you'd have to stick around to not to incur any costs. This is my understanding.
And I think the city manager was asked to come back with that information. But essentially, if they've bought power in advance for you, you would have to pay that off to leave. So it's a matter of time. So that's
Wondering if she
amortized.
got that information if this committee didn't get it for her.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's written down, it's in the,
Cost sharing.
Joint cost sharing.
yeah.
I think that's something that Henry's supposed to speak to at the meeting.
Yeah.
That's
Okay,
fine.
so we'll get it from Henry.
I think so.
Yeah.
And I think they've been fine tuning the procedure because communities have asked about it. So
Yeah,
I think they've tried to put a little bit more meat on the bones.
I don't have an opinion to offer, but I do stack of, not that many, but a stack of mailings that came back that were sent out to notify people of the change. But a woman came in, she said she couldn't get through to the CPC&H number, which was troubling a little bit. But then she said, what's going on with these flyers? My neighbors all have them. I don't have one. What is this all about? And I said, well, and she had a utility bill. I said, well, do you have your utility bill? So I looked at it and she had direct energy. I said, well, you're not a member of CPC&H. The city is, but you can opt out. And you've basically, by having a third party provider, you're opted out. So that's why she's very savvy about her energy. Every 4 months, she looks at the energy prices and she changes when she needs to change. And has direct energy, she has Eversource. But the point is that communication is still not clear to her on how community power works in the city. And she's a savvy, energy buyer, and so I think it's really important, whatever happens, that CPC&H and the city, where they can help, do a better job of educating people about it. Because if we do stay, then the only people that are going to lose out are the people that don't understand that they can pick and choose who they go to. And a lot of people don't. For some reason, people don't pay attention to the utility bills. I don't know if it's some kind of thing that we all have. I'm kind of the same way at my house.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we need to change that behavior.
Yeah, and
It's hard.
plus, also really emphasize the non-financial benefits, because I think it's not just about the financial but put it in plain language that people can understand.
But I think as CPCH grows, and they're already a big player, but just in the state, between all the main players, there needs to be better education around, as you get your electric supply either from the utility or from CPCNH, and this is how, pay attention. If you want to take advantage of savings, do it. You can switch back and forth. I think it just needs to be a much bigger spotlight put on that by the powers to be. And I also think this refresh is another stumble in that it's not meant to build up to the point there's 3,000 people that need to get refreshed. My experience in Massachusetts, it was a monthly process. I've mentioned this before. Every month, the power aggregators got billing information, they got metering information, they got new customer information, and in that month, they enrolled the new customers. It was just a routine process. Every month, you always have churn, and you're bringing them on to the community power programs every month, just as a matter of an administrative procedure. So it's onesie twosies every month, and you're not sitting on it for a year.
Yep.
And then we got to bring 20,000 customers onto CPCNH because it'll help us operationally, financially, and we go do it. And then we got a PR issue on our hand because it's such a big number of customers, as opposed to it just, kind of quietly happening every month, just as a part of routine, because we're part of a community power. So every month, 30 customers, and the city might get in. That's the way it's supposed to do it. They're trying to manage it in a way. And they got to the point where there wasn't a good time to do it because the rates weren't lower than utility. So they had to just move forward. So that is something too. I think they're getting a little too cute in terms of how they're managing.
Okay, well, we're taking a lot of time on it, but it's important. So we'll hope you all can make it on the 20th. I think this is a good session where we've refined the issues and refined the questions that we have.
Counselor, can you just go, what's the kind of the protocol on a meeting like that? They're gonna give a presentation, and then is it really the council that has the ability to question, or does this committee kind of just watch? Or
we're around the table, and the mayor recognizes whoever has a question.
Okay.
Let's see. Senate Bill 538 is a bill by David Waters to guarantee 20 years worth of net metering for municipal solar projects. Went up to testify that it looks like it's going to pass. And then there were some other legislative updates. We put in MC's CPC and NH analysis. Anything you want to add to that, MC?
No, we've covered a lot of this, just back of the envelope and prepping some questions for the next time, for the April 20th meeting, really.
Okay, great. Other business? Any? Public comment? When Stephanie on Zoom?
All good.
Yep. Okay, motion to adjourn?
Moved.
Second.
All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
Yeah. I know, on top of one.
Yeah.
Just
Testifying, or